Right, let's get started then. So we spoke in the previous class about hooks. Okay, so we were starting to look at storytelling in essence overall. So storytelling has 5 elements to it. So it's the hook, the most important part of the whole link, because if you don't have a good hook, then people won't listen to your story in the first place. So the hook is extremely important. Then we have the crumbs, the dress up, the payoff, and the blackout. Okay. So once you have an idea, premise for your link, then you will start by figuring out where you want the story to go. What is it that you want the listener to get out of it at the end of the day? So you will work on your the payoff, and then you start with your hook. And the hook is something that you spend a lot of time on because it's not easy to do. It's not easy to create a good hook that will draw people in, right? And then from the hook, we move on to the crumbs. And that is where we are at now. So just quickly, can you see my slide? Can you see the PowerPoint, anyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay, so we're looking at chapter 4, page 120 to 129. So the crumbs is the easiest way to remember it is like thinking about Hansel and Gretel, okay, that fairy tale where the dad dropped them off and then didn't come and fetch them, where they tried to find their way back. Yes, obviously better ending in this case. So a presenter must keep dropping mini payoffs. So that's what it comes down to. So you as a presenter, now you have your hook. Great, fine. You're not going to keep me as a listener if you don't keep dropping crumbs, if you don't keep giving me mini payoffs that I can engage with, right? So it's this, any story that is a good story will keep you with little twists and turns. If you think a story is going one way, then suddenly it takes a turn into a different direction, okay? That's what keeps us engaged and that keeps us intrigued until the very end. So you should also be dropping crumbs every 7 to 14 seconds, just like you would be doing in the hook. Every link has a forward momentum that leads as a path or crumbs towards the payoff. That's where we're heading. So we know that's where we're heading when we start talking. No matter how good the hook is, or even your punchline or your payoff, at the end of a link, if your setup is not done correctly, or if the body of this link doesn't move the story forward, which is what it should be doing, then the listener will move on to something else that will attract their attention. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. It doesn't matter how good your hook is. If your body of your story, if the crumbs are not good enough, if you don't keep dropping crumbs throughout, as a listener, you will get bored and tune out. Okay. So this forward momentum has got absolutely nothing to do with keeping a link short or talking faster or even playing high energy music. None of that matters. Instead, it's about keeping your listener engaged, and you do that by staying focused. So you should know what it is that you're talking about at all times. So if you stay focused, you can keep the listener on the right track. So it doesn't help you say that you're going to end up at point A and then you take a drive around the block and then you go to point C first and take another drive and then only you come to point A, okay? You should also be dropping crumbs every couple of seconds, 7 to 14, like I said. These mini payoffs, these changes in directions or the twists and the turns of a story that move the story forward and keep the listeners interested through a strategy will pay off later on, okay? We call this strategy planting ideas. So we keep planting ideas in your head about what might be happening, where the story might be heading, whether it is heading in that direction or not. It makes you think about it, okay? It draws in your imagination. But there are a couple of reasons why listeners would lose interest in links or stories in this specific crumb section, which is the middle phase of a story. And these are, firstly, trying too hard to make someone laugh. to make a listener laugh, okay? As a rule of thumb, look for one punchline or payoff for every link. That's what you should be doing. Look for one payoff, so one punchline per link. If a presenter can get into great laughs in every link, that's even better. Wonderful. The chances, however, of a third big laugh moment happening are very slim, and looking for it in a link usually feels forced, which annoys a listener or will make them feel uncomfortable, and they might lose interest and then they'll tune out. So that's the first thing, trying too hard to make someone laugh. The second reason people might lose interest in your hook rather, is, or your link, that's what I was trying to say, your link. It's been a long day, is too many phone calls or voice notes. So if you have too many phone calls or voice notes, that can distract your listener, or it can make them seem or feel annoyed. Listener interaction on the phone, though, is crucial. It's really important, whether it's through voice notes or actually just putting your listeners on air, because it adds characters to your show. Okay, so they bring a certain element to your show. However, you should always aim to take no more than 3 pieces of interaction per link.
Ma'am, you are muted.
Oh, hello. How long was I muted?
For like 10 seconds, but we can
Okay.
hear you now.
All right, great. I wonder how that happened. Interesting. Anyway, so what I was saying was, so the first reason is that people tune out is we're trying too hard to make people laugh. And then the second one is too many phone calls or voice notes. So that's the one we're talking about now, where I was muted. So it's great to have callers on the line, or it's great to have voice notes that you play, but you never play more than 3 at a time. Especially not in music-based, well, in personality-based music radio shows. So if one piece of content from the caller is brilliant and keeps the listener wanting more, then you can take another piece, or you can play another clip or put another caller on the line. And if all 3 are great stories that have completely different angles, that have strong hooks, that have payoffs, and that add to the entertainment value of the link, then take all 3 pieces. But very rarely take more than that. Also, it's not always that all 3 of these pieces will do all of that, okay? Sometimes listeners just aren't that interesting. So remember to never put a caller on the air simply because you think that they are going to make your show better on their own, okay? Or because you don't want to talk the whole time, or you don't want to give an opinion, so you get other people's opinions. A caller or voice notes need to make your show sound better. It needs to make you as a listener, as a presenter, sound better overall. That's the only reason we put them on air, to add to the entertainment value of it. So if they are not adding to the entertainment value, then you are going to lose listeners, okay? So they need to be there to keep your listeners engaged and intrigued. So moreover, always structure your listener interaction in every link. So use your second strongest piece first. So when you're talking to your listeners, use your second strongest piece of content first. And then after that, you can play your weakest piece, okay? So then you play your second piece, which is the weakest of the 3. And at the end, you play your strongest. It's always a good idea to end the link completely after your last interaction, which is this strong piece of listener interaction. So that way, you end the link off with a high. It's the same way that stories are structured. It's the same way movies are structured, okay? So you start that same way. So now we've passed the hook. Now we're in the crumbs, and in the crumb section, in the body of your link, you will do your second strongest piece of content first to make sure that you keep the listeners intrigued. Then you do the weakest. Why? Because presenters are already tuned in. They want to hear the payoff. So they want to hear this third piece, which is the strongest piece. That is your payoff. Okay, that's why they are listening. So they're not going to go anywhere if you play the weakest right before that, because they have already bought in. And then we end with your strongest listener interaction. And then we black out. As soon as that piece is over, you should be done. A good idea is to end your link there. The rule of thumb is, that when a listener says goodbye, the link is over. Okay, sticking to this normally forces a presenter to end on a high and to leave the link at its peak. It's not easy to do, and presenters struggle with this. Okay, they have massive struggles with knowing when to end a link, which you should simply be doing when someone says goodbye. So once again, it's called placement theory, and it says that your first piece is your second strongest, your second piece is the weakest of the three, third piece is the strongest piece, and blackout as soon as that is over. Talk radio is not quite the same. Talk radio is handled a little bit differently, and I don't want you to get confused. Okay, you are not doing links for me for talk radio. You are doing music links for now. Presenters and producers in talk radio should only be concerned with the value of, should be concerned with the value of every interaction. So every single interaction on talk radio is extremely important because they don't have that music element that music radio stations do. So the call screener or the producer should always ask, will this caller add to the link? Will they add something to the story, to whatever we are talking about? Will they introduce a point that moves the story forward without derailing the conversation? Will they add something to the overall entertainment of the link? If the answer is yes to all three of these questions, then you can allow the caller to go on air. Okay. If the answer is not yes to all of those, you should revisit and relook and perhaps take another caller. Okay. It's not an easy job to be a good call screener or producer. And then just quickly back here. Back here. The last one here is too many stories or topics. Every link should focus on one main idea, one main story or theme or topic. Everything around the story should contribute to the story and advance the story and move it forward. If it's not moving forward, you shouldn't be doing it, okay? In a show with multiple characters and cast members, pick one main storyteller. So your main host normally would be the main storyteller, or perhaps you had someone who came in for a feature, then they would be the main storyteller, okay? The main story should be told in the link, and the other characters on the show should only contribute to your story. So that is how you should be sticking to something. So if you have your one main thought or link when you're prepping, then you can get the different angles to whatever everyone else will be adding to said link, but you as the host will be doing the main story within the link. So there will be cases, especially in talk radio, or busy commercial radio shows, where a show needs to move on from one topic to the link in one link. So where we need to move from one topic to another topic in the same link. It doesn't happen often, and it happens mostly on talk radio stations. But it's crucial that you realize this, and you are not yet at a place where you can do this, but this is called a multi-break. So a multi-break link, and a multi-break link should transition either deliberately by a listener. So you either use a listener to transition so that people are aware that you're switching or that there's a change in the topic, and this can be done using imaging or a different music bed or a deliberate announcement of the change, or it needs to be done so seamlessly that a listener does not consciously realize that they've moved with the story and the show onto a different topic. Talk radio stations tend to be very good at this. That's what they do. They normally have 3 or 4 topics that they speak about at the same time before moving on. and they have been in the industry for a while, so they are able to do it extremely seamlessly so that it doesn't bug you as a listener, or so that you don't wonder about the hop in topics. Again, it's done in such a way that it's still structured. So it's not that you are taking one topic and just running with it all over the place. You have different topics, but you split them. Okay, so it doesn't seem like it's all over the place, which is really important for us. It should be the goal of the presenter to avoid the top 3 pitfalls that we just spoke about. So you should try to avoid putting on too many callers or too many voice notes. You should try avoiding making people laugh or trying to make them laugh. So if you make them laugh, wonderful, but don't try to make them laugh and fail. And then too many topics. That's what you should be doing. Because we want them to stay, okay? We want to keep them. And the only way to do that is to stick to what the crumbs tell us we should do, which is drop our crumbs or a mini payoff or something every 7 to 14 seconds. So in the book, there are other techniques and skills that can help extend a link engagement, which we're going to look at now and get into now. And that is that based on the research discussed earlier regarding your listeners' attention span. So we remember attention spans are only 8 seconds long due to the way that we're living and multitasking at all times because we are overloaded with information. One can say that a presenter should be looking at dropping the crumbs every 7 to 14 seconds. These little twists and turns in the story will keep this story flowing and will help keep this momentum going forward and keep your listeners interested. Movie trailers are usually a very good example here. Movie trailers are really good at getting people to stay interested. Good movie trailers will change scenes and moods and momentums or storylines even in like 10 seconds. Any longer and the movie trailer seems to drag and feel dull. So anything shorter might feel like a continuous high-speed car chase. So they're really good at figuring out their timings there. Good movie trailers usually take the viewer through 3 different phases. Okay, this is on page 126 in your textbook. So 3 phases. Phase 1, the viewer has absolutely no idea what's going on because I'm just starting to watch this thing now, so it's still new to me. Phase 2, the drama is compounded and exaggerated, leaving the viewer confused, immersed, and hooked on the storyline. The viewer is then excited to get to the conclusion. And then phase 3 is the sense of conclusion, but only enough for the viewer to go out and watch the actual movie. So that is how they would structure a movie trailer. If a radio presenter can get a listener to listen this way, then the listener would stay focused throughout the link. They won't be going anywhere. In a performance link, so remember we get 2 types of links. One is the promise and one is a performance link. So in a performance link, the listener will reach a conclusion, but will have enjoyed the link enough to stay listening for the next radio piece. So that's the difference there. The ability to get this right, however, isn't easy, and it takes a lot of practice. This is not something that just happens overnight. It comes with practicing. So practicing storytelling often. So I've told you, you need to start telling stories, whether it's kids' stories to kids, because then you can use all the emotive language, or whether it's simply telling stories to your family and friends, or simply standing in front of the mirror and telling yourself a story. Start practicing storytelling. And it also takes a lot of patience. But once you've mastered storytelling and the ability to keep a listener engaged, they will be with you. Okay, you will have gained a loyal listener, and you will be on your way to being a great presenter who will be in the what phase is that now? Yeah, it will be set up so you can be like a breakfast or a drive presenter then, if you're willing or able to keep your listeners engaged at all times. So there are 4 tips that we're going to look at now that can help you as a presenter master the dropping of clever crumbs, and those are these 4. Okay, so getting the listeners buy-in, keeping it short, sharp, and simple, painting a picture and using emotive language, and speaking only in the active voice, never the passive voice. So what does this mean? Get the listener's buy-in. How do you get a listener's buy-in? If a presenter if I can get you to agree with me from the start, within the first couple of seconds of the body of your link, then you're on your way to keeping the listener engaged, okay? So if you can get them to agree with you, think about politicians. They're very good at that, where they ask questions or make statements and things, and you go, you agree. So they have your buy-in at that specific moment. So this means that presenters need to know their listeners. You need to know who it is that is listening to your show so that you can understand their value systems and what they would be interested in. So knowing who they are, knowing what they like, what they dislike, having meaningful data, facts about them. Okay, TV networks are really good at getting viewers to agree with them. And they do this by reflecting on the listeners' worldviews, and they support these views more often than not. So we speak about the things that you believe in, and we support that in essence. So radio if we think about TV presenters and we think about how the content is targeted at specifically aimed people, then one example would be to look at a radio station like Fox News. Fox News is very well known as a conservative network, a very conservative news network. Their content is all targeted at conservatives, and they know exactly what political views that will resonate with the listeners and what won't, or viewers rather in this case. So it's very important that you understand your listeners. Radio presenters should be the same and look for agreement in their listeners early on in the link. So when you're linking, find agreement early on in your link for your listeners. Remember, this is now excluding the hook. This doesn't include the hook. This is after the hook. This is the body of content that we are talking about. Then keeping it short, sharp, and simple, or the KISS method. So keep it simple, stupid. That's another way of saying it. That one, what it means is you must remember that a listener might be listening with one ear, okay? Because they're doing other things in between. So you can't have content that is with language that is too high, because if I don't follow along, you might lose me very quickly if I'm doing something else and then starting to tune back in. And then I won't have any clue what you are talking about if you're using very high level theoretical language, for instance. So a presenter must always remember that listeners are engaged in other actions while listening to radio, especially outside of breakfast and drive. During breakfast and drive, we are more engaged because we are on our way somewhere, so we're listening. But for the rest of the day, we do other things. We work, we cook, we study, I don't know, just have it on as a companion in the background, just so it's not dead air or dead silence. Okay. So people are almost always listening with half an ear. So it means it's essential to keep the narrative simple, short, and easy to follow, which will help keep your listeners engaged at the end of the day. Okay. Then paint a picture and use emotive language. So if I close my eyes, I need to be able to imagine what you are saying. I need to be able to see the scenario in front of me. You should always try to engage a listener's imagination. Imagination is what works on radio because it's theater of the mind. It's like a book. If I read something, I can imagine it. So if you say something, I should be able to imagine it. Same thing. Using emotive language helps to build the story and to create a picture in the listener's minds. So then we use phrases like, imagine this, or when is the last time when, or what if, or picture this, or what if, remember when, think about this, or think about blah, 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 okay? That is ways that we can get people to actually imagine the scenario. And there are a lot of these types of examples. This is also how some of the hooks started, okay? With putting you in their shoes by imagining a situation. And then the last one there, speak only in the active voice, never the passive voice. That's not an easy skill to master. A lot of people talk or write in passive. It takes a lot of discipline. Likeable presenters use the active voice more often because it engages the listeners and it's personable. Okay, it's more personal. Active voice sentences always flow easier, and they're easier for a listener to follow than passive voice sentences. So passive voice sentences make the listeners work a little bit harder to understand the sentence, and active sentences alternate, so it's not as difficult to follow. I'm not sure if you understand what the difference is between the two, but in essence, the one says, I am eating a burger, and the other one says, a burger is being eaten by me. That is in essence passive versus active. So the first one was active, the easier one. The longer one was passive. Another example in your textbook, by an example 4B on page 127, reads as follows. The active voice says, at each restaurant, the host ate at least one burger from the menu. The passive voice reads, at each restaurant, at least one burger from the menu was eaten by the host. See, like the longer sentence of the two is the more difficult one, and you need to think a little bit more. There's another example on the next page. Active voice says Lady Gaga won the Academy Award for Best Song. Passive voice says the Academy Award for the Best Song was won by Lady Gaga. So a lot of people, like I said, write in this manner. Yeah, so these are the 4 elements that you should work on, okay, with regards to crumbs, the 4 tips. So getting your listeners buy-in, so getting them to agree with you, keeping it short, sharp, simple, to the point, easily understandable, painting a picture and using emotive language. So if I close my eyes, I should be able to picture it, but also putting me in the situation with things like remember when, what if, imagine when last, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that kind of stuff. And then lastly, speak only in the active voice, never the passive voice. So once you have mastered this, or once you are able to execute this, you will have set your listener up to anticipate a great resolution or payoff or punchline. This is the final part of a link, is your payoff. And this comprises of the moment in which a presenter rewards you as a listener and they resolve the earlier setup. So whatever conflict we had, this is where that gets sorted out, where this gets resolved, whether the antagonist or the protagonist wins or whatever happens. Or this might be where, if they told a joke, where the main punchline of the joke gets told, or perhaps you throw in an unexpected twist into the story. So you could have ended here, but then you thought to add something else and you added that in, okay? But the payoff specifically is the reward for the listener for having listened to the story or link till now. To construct a payoff, always ask yourself what it is you want the listener to remember from this link. Remember, I said start with figuring out your payoff first when you construct your link. This will help you to define the payoff for links that are simply utility-based. So things like perhaps a news story or details surrounding the traffic or even the weather. Defining the crux of a story, the payoff, is the most important leave behind moment. And if you can leave that specific moment behind for the listener, you will allow them to construct and set up a payoff effectively, which is what we want. So now we're going to look at what we call the execution rule of 4. Okay. This is also a tool that can help you plan a link. And what it comprises of is a teaser, the trouble, the muddle, the triumph or the failure of the story, and the kicker. So that is the different phases of the execution rule of 4. And the teaser presents the characters or the obstacles of the story. The trouble is after now we've been introduced to the characters, we are presented with the conflict or allowing for some sort of a desire to arise. Then we have a muddle, And the model is where the initial strategy leads to another obstacle. So you see, we don't just simply leave it there. After something has happened, something else will happen. So another type of obstacle. And then we have either the triumph or the failure. So this is where the moment in which the strategy is being laid out is either successful or unsuccessful. Okay, he gets the goal or he doesn't. That kind of scenario. And then the kicker is the ending, in which the changes that have just took place as a result are depicted. So that's how we break that up. So when preparing your link, start with the following questions. What is the payoff for the listener? So we start at the ending, like I've said. How do we write in order to engage with our listeners in 8 to 10 seconds? So what do I want at the end of the day the listener should get out of this link? How do I start this link? How do I hook a link in such a way that I have my listeners as buy-in? How do I get them to be hooked into what it is that we are talking about? Then what are our views on this topic? What is my view on this topic? What is your view on this topic? What is it that we are speaking about? Because when you write a story, I want you to bring in your something personal. Okay, so what are your thoughts on the link? How would you say something like this? What have you heard? Whatever it might be. And then lastly, how can you add more layers? So what do we do to make this specific story seem bigger, bolder, more intriguing, funnier, bringing in different elements to this? Okay, so what can we do extra on top of what has been done? So if you follow these basic rules that we looked at, from designing a clock through to the structuring of a link, which is the Mexican on the bicycle, through to where we are now, the actual link and the content itself, you have a very formulaic, systematic approach to creating the most interesting, entertaining, and engaging content possible for an hour of radio or another piece of spoken word or spoken content. Okay, so that is what you can do if you follow all of these. Have you followed along with what I was saying now? Are you with me? Have I explained it well enough to you? Hello?
Yes, ma'am, we have.
Right, so you understand all of this completely. Great. So what I want to briefly just do, because this is such a big part of your assignment, is, just give me a second. Okay, just showcase this again. Who's joining now? Okay, so let's just briefly recap here. So structuring a link, you use the Mexican on the bicycle wheel, or the Mexican on the bicycle. So you use your obligations, your thought, and then your other obligations, okay? There are very good ways of using these obligations without it seeming tedious or without it sounding too formulaic, so you can work on it to do it more creatively. Then you stick to one thought per link, whichever way you want to go with this specific thought, as long as you stick to one thought per link. And then it was the hook, the crumbs, the dress up, the payoff, and the blackout, which is what we looked at. So the hook is the most important part. You have about 8 seconds to grab someone's attention within this hook. And then we looked at different tips and applications that you will utilize when you are creating a story for me. The first is ask your listeners something. So asking them a question directly brings them into this conversation immediately, okay? Because it can spark a sense of curiosity from a listener. Then secondly, you set up conflict immediately. Every great story has conflict. It requires conflict. And by immediately pointing to the conflict in the link, the listeners are transported into the middle of the situation, and you will be intrigued to see what happens. Then if you make a strong statement or declaration or pronouncement, whatever it is, you will trigger an emotional reaction from your listener. So radio is emotive, so we want to trigger those emotions from our listeners. So by giving a bold or a strong statement, we create an emotional trigger for the audience. Whether they agree or disagree with the statement, it doesn't matter, as long as they feel strongly about it. And that is opinion-based because it gives the listener something to react to, and it'll always be way more effective than fact-based stories, because we remember how things made us feel. We don't remember the facts behind them. Then we make you curious, because we as people are naturally curious human beings. So once you trigger that mystery or intrigue in the hook, you will be able to keep them interested. Okay, so they will be able to keep listening to what it is that you are doing, but you never give too much away. Otherwise, if you've satisfied that curiosity, they have no reason to keep listening to you still. Okay, so that was the hook. And then the crumbs, what we looked at now, is the body of your story. And then within this crumbs body, you have different things that you need to do. So firstly, you have the placement theory. So within your body, so after your hook, within your body, the first piece of content within your body should be the second strongest piece of content. Second piece should be the weakest, because that is now you setting up for this payoff. Okay, the third piece, the strongest piece of content there, is your payoff. It's the reason I was listening to the link this whole time, and then we black out immediately after that. So what you should stay away from them, trying too hard to make people laugh, trying to put too many callers or voice notes on the air, and using too many stories or topics. Okay. And then the 4 tips to help you gain your listeners by dropping clever crumbs throughout, or help them stay listening to you, is to get the listeners buy-in. You do this by asking a question that they can agree to keep it short, sharp, simple, to the point, painting a picture, using emotive language, and speaking only in the active voice, never passive. So I want you to try to focus on explaining what a certain object is without saying what that object is. So work on descriptive language. You work on the way that you will explain something to someone without saying the words. Or for instance, if you need to explain a sunrise, how would you explain to a sunrise to someone who is blind? How would you tell them what that looks like, what that feels like? Okay. Well, obviously they can feel, they just can't see it. But that kind of stuff. So focus on different things, whatever it is. Like when you're in a class, try to say that thing is a blackboard without saying blackboard, or that's a light without saying a light, or a chair without saying a chair, etc. Okay, that stuff, or that kind of stuff. Then we looked at how to execute a link, and that we called the execution rule of 4, which is quite important. So you need to know these. You need to understand these. So the execution rule of 4 says there's a teaser, a trouble, muddle, and then the triumph, and lastly there's a thing called the kicker. So the teaser is where I present my characters and my obstacles to you. Then the trouble is where there is some sort of a conflict because of this, or allowing certain desires to arise. The muddle is where this first initial strategy now leads to another obstacle, so we're making it bigger because we're adding more. This is what we call also part of the dress up. So the dress up is simply the part of the crumbs that we make bigger. Okay, we add more layers to this thing. And then the triumph or the kicker is the moment that the strategy works or it doesn't work. And then we simply explain how it all went out. Okay, so then we stopped on page 129 with the 4 questions that you need to ask when you start preparing for a link, which is, what is the payoff for the listener firstly? How can we write this in order to engage with our listeners in 8 to 10 seconds? What are our views? What is your view on this topic? And how can I add more layers? Okay. So these questions can be used as a template for planning a link in detail. And there's a figure on page 129 that shows it for you. What it says there is the story, the tease, the setup, the point of view, the exit. Okay. So again, the story, then the tease, then the setup of the story, then the point of view, what is your point of view, and then out of that link. So that is how you would structure a story for me. because you have to structure a story for me. So it's part of what we're doing. And then from there, we're going to move on to planning, or well, to show prep, because it is extremely important. And obviously, you could have seen through all of these that how important show prep actually is, right? Because without show prep, there's no way that you're going to come up with a story that's going to keep me interested from beginning to end. Okay, a link like that requires prepping. We don't just simply jump into it. When you do your story for me that you are going to write, that's part of your assessment. It asks you to break it down, and to break it down according to page 130 and 131 in your textbook. So if we look at that thing, what it says is, it's the link planning sheet, then it gives you the story summary, which you're going to write in for me, the emotivity, where you're going to write down what emotions you feel about a topic, and then you're going to write the emotion that you wish to evoke from me for the story. Then you're going to write out a promise link. So the promise link is where you doing a throw forward or a tease, or where you promise me that whatever I'm about to hear is going to be of value to me. So I should stay tuned to hear this. So then you're going to script your exact promise. Then your hook. So write what you will say in the first 10 seconds to capture the attention for the segment. So you're going to write out your hook of your story for me. Then you're going to write down your point of view. Okay, so your point of view, because this is a personal story. So there are 3 options there: a personal story of your own that relates to this topic, a story that you heard about the topic, what thoughts are in your head, what opinions do you have on this topic. Then you have the payoff or the punchline. So what will be your resolution? How will this link end? How do you picture this thing playing out? And then what else? What else can we do to make it bigger, add more layers? What will make it go viral, shareable, and into a did you know moment, or a have you heard? So when you combine everything within this link planning sheet, you should have one great story for radio. Okay. So you need to utilize all of these. All of these separately are not going to give you one story, because it's going to look structured and split up into structures, because that's what it is. So, but you need all of that. If you've planned all of these together, then you will have one great story. Omalemo.
Hi, ma'am. So do we have to like draw this table, or do we just write the story?
So what I would suggest, I normally like it if you write the stories as well, but I need to mark according to this thing. So I need to make sure that if you only fill in this section, this link planning sheet, that your story will make sense to me, so that I can see how everything will fit together. So what I said last year to the students is to do both, just to make sure, because it counts so much marks. Because it's 25 marks, it's a quarter of your whole assignment. So make sure that you have enough info that I can give those marks to you. Okay. So if you don't write out the whole story, that's fine, but then make sure that your story summary sums it up in such a way that I will understand what you are saying, how everything will fit together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So it's imperative that you understand this section very well. So the link planning sheet will start with a reminder of the execution rule of 4, which we just looked at. When is it due? It's only due in May. 23 May. 23 May it's due. So planning out these 4 rules is the cornerstone of any great piece of content. So if you can plan out your links according to this, you will have great content, okay? So the hook, you would start off with, how are we going to set it up to engage with the audience within 10 seconds before they tune away? What specific words can we use to create maximum impact? And then the payoff, what is our intention? Is it humor? Is it conflict? Is it deeper emotions? What is it that you are trying to get out of me? Where are we going to go with this? How do we want the listeners to feel? How do we get it out of them? know the out before you begin. Once again, know your out before you begin. If a good excerpt comes up spontaneously during the segment, go with it. Every now and then, we do things in such a way that organically we actually create better content live than we prepped for. So then in that moment, go with your organic content. Don't go with what you've prepped, because your organic will probably sound better. Okay. And then the point of view. What is each person in studio? So let's say you have 3 people in studio with you, 3 characters. What are their views on the topic? What are their opinions on the same topic? Can you share a relatable story of a personal experience? What emotions can you personally express? What are your thoughts that are going through your head? What is your opinion? So as you can see, we are always linking it back to you from a personal point of view, because it gives me more insight into you and it might make me feel more relatable. It also, I'm one of those people, you should have noticed by now, I always ask why on everything. I do the same with content pieces. If I read or hear a piece of content that someone sent to me, I always want to know why they thought about this. If they don't tell me, if it's simply a generic thing, then I want to know where it came from. Why did you think of this specific thing? What made you talk about this? Okay, so that is that kind of element, that personal element that will draw the listener to you. And then what else? Lastly, what else can I do to make it bigger? So can I introduce an expert or a guest? Or is there a production piece? Because music always makes things just more intense and just draws you in more. Or is there another piece of conflict or controversy or another story or a stunt or a viral video or something that I can utilize to make it seem bigger? Recognize what content could be bigger and what content is perfect as is. So we don't always need to add more if the content pieces are perfect as is, but that's very rare that they will be perfect as is. Okay, and that is where we are stopping for today. That's what happens if no one talks to me. Then I talk and then I get finished a lot quicker than I thought I would be. So if you understand storytelling in detail, you understand what a clock is, and that within a clock, we have links. And that link is when you switch on the microphone until when you switch it off. And how you structure it is by utilizing the Mexican bicycle wheel. That says obligation, 1 thought per link, obligations fulfilled. Obligations are things like your show ID or the station ID rather, your show's name, your name, the song that just played, the time, okay, that kind of elements. That's your obligations fulfilled. And then from there, if you understand that in detail and you can now use this storytelling within that, then you're good to go, except for remembering a promise and a performance link as well. So we only get 2 types of links. One is a promise, one is a performance. Every link will be one of the 2. So the promise link would set up the performance link for you. And within this performance link, you will start the performance link with storytelling, aka you start your performance link with a hook. And then you give crumbs. And then you have your payoff, okay, within this performance link. So that is everything that you should know now with regards to creating content at the moment. I see someone laughed at me. Thank you. Okay, so then that's where we're going to end it for today. And we'll carry on with show prep next week. Where we're going to start looking at links, so link planning sheets, because obviously if you have a show, that's great, you still need to plan your specific links within that show. Any last questions for me? With the summative at 1.2, what examples do we give for explaining whether it was successful or not? So you use the stuff that we went through. So if it was successful, let's say it's a promise. If it was a successful promise link, it would have things like, it would evoke emotion out of you, firstly. So you would say that it was a very emotive link and it did rise to my expectations with regards to what the promise said that it is going to do, for instance. And you can say that the promise was successful because it did encapture the storytelling elements. Or you can say that the promise was unsuccessful because there was no emotiveness within this link. Okay, the listener, the presenter did not try to evoke any emotion out of me. Or for your promise link, you can say like something like, it wasn't a good tease or a good throw forward because they did not make me feel like I need to stay listening to the radio to listen to this next part. They didn't excite me for the content that was coming up. Or you can say that the promise link did not, what else? The promise link should also lead to the hook. So the promise link should give you ideas of what will be coming up within the hook. So you can also say they didn't do that, for instance. You can go again and look at the promise and performance class that we did. Let me quickly see if I can find it. Because within those, they also give you a couple, I wrote down quite a few things for you there within promise and performance. A promise is a tease or a throw forward. It promises the listener that what they're about to hear is going to be of value to them and that they should stay tuned in for this content. So that firstly, you can tell me it was successful because it did do this. It did tell me that tell me that it's going to be of value for me, so I should listen, or it didn't, so unsuccessful. Or secondly, the promise must also find the hook in the link or piece of content, or find information about whatever is coming up that sells this piece of content to the audience. So you can tell me they didn't sell this piece of content to you, and then it needs to be planned. So perhaps it sounds like it wasn't planned. Then from a performance point of view, the performance needs to now say what the promise was building up towards. So it has to be emotive. If it's not emotive, then it wasn't successful. So it needs to make you feel something, engage with you on an emotional level. It should be relevant and relatable. So if that content piece, that performance piece is not relevant or relatable, it wasn't successful, okay? Then you can tell me whether this performance piece has evoked this kind of emotional reaction out of you or not. That's it. That's what comes down to promise and performance. So that's what you will tell me. You will simply tell me whether it was or not, utilizing Lecture 17's notes. Okay, good to go. You understand all of that now. Okay, then I am going to say goodbye and say that you must have a wonderful weekend. And next week, I shall see you in person in class again. Oh, by the way, cool. All right, then have a wonderful rest of your afternoon and weekend, and see you next week.